EQ is one of the most fundamental parts of mixing, and usually one of the first areas that a mix engineer will go to when they're working on your mix. Today I'm going to give you some tools and guidelines to help you follow as you approach your own mixing. Before we go into the specific techniques about EQing, I want to talk about the overarching principle of it and why it's so important, and that is balance. The balance is about tonal balance, in this case with EQ. And what that means is every single instrument has a different range of frequencies and a different focus of where they sit in that frequency range. For example, a kick drum is low. You have usually around 60 hertz is the fundamental. A bass drum has a fundamental around 80. A piano can range over the whole entire frequency range. Guitar is similar depending on where the focus is. And the vocal has a really nice sweet spot between 1 and 6K. Now this might not make sense to you now, but what I'm trying to get at is that when we are EQing, we can allow each instrument and each part of the mix to have its own place sonically in the frequency spectrum. So just like there's panning, and you can have something turn to the left side versus turn to the right side, and vice versa, there's also that with EQing and frequencies. So the low end, we try and allow the low end to be reserved for the low end instruments. And the vocal, where the vocal sits around that area 1 to 6K, specifically 1K, we want to leave some room just for the vocal. We might be cutting back some electric guitars or keyboards if they're very heavy in that area so that the vocal can shine through. If everything's competing at 1K, then that means that nobody's going to get to shine. And that is the importance of EQ, is allowing every instrument to have its own space in the frequency spectrum, and then they all can shine. So let's get to a couple techniques to help you get there. The first important technique we're going to learn about is called low cut, and it's also known as high pass. And this is a filtering technique with EQ where you can take a band and pull out all the frequencies that you don't want in the low end, and they will no longer be a part of that track, and only the high frequencies will pass. Now this is super important because there is commonly a low end buildup that will happen in almost every single mix you do, because there's so many instruments that have low end a part of the actual instrument but may not be being used. For example, if you're playing a piano or a guitar in the mid to high range frequencies but you're not touching the bass end, you can get rid of those frequencies because you're not playing notes that trigger those frequencies. This allows for the bass and kick to then have more space and to be more focused and more impactful. So let's take a look at the screen and see what I'm talking about. I'd like to show you on an EQ plugin what a high pass looks like. So we're going to take the first band right here, and this type is the shape of the band, and this shape is called the high pass. So what that means is as we change the Q value is how steep the slope is when it comes to high pass. So that just changes how gradually it allows the frequencies to be cut off, and this would be the most straight. So that means anything past this line you would not hear. So then you could take this band and move it up and down. And again, so lots of instruments, you can put this around 100, 150 sometimes, or 80, that whole area, and then all the instruments' critical information will pass through, while this lower frequencies that aren't even a part of the instrument, that aren't important to the sound of it, won't be involved, and then you have more space for something like the kick drum and the bass. The next technique I want to talk to you about is called high cut, or low pass, which is the opposite of the first area we spoke about, where now only the low frequencies are able to come through. So for this, we're going to be looking at the same Renaissance EQ. We're going to take band 6, we're going to change the type until this is the shape that it looks like, which is now a low pass. So as we sweep this back and forth, everything below this line will be able to pass through. Anything above it is going to be cut. So this is why it's called low pass or high cut. Now the next technique we're going to talk about is cutting, and that's going to be with a smaller EQ band than we were using before with the high and low pass. But in this case, you can sweep the area of the frequency spectrum and find any problematic frequencies and then cut those areas. I'll show you what that looks like in the DAW. Okay, so now as we're looking at the EQ, we're going to take our second band right here, turn it on, and we're going to use this bell shape. And that means as you pick it up, it kind of looks like a bell, depending on where your cue's at, right? So you can take the cue, which is how much of the frequency you're going to affect at once. So we're going to make it thin, and then you can listen to your audio like this, and this is called an EQ sweep. You can listen for different audio signals and for different parts of the frequency spectrum that pop out at you, and then you can cut those. Now I also want to mention, and this is a little less frequently talked about, but you can do the same thing from the cut. So you can listen to an audio source and sweep it back and forth and see where it starts to sound better. Sometimes as you're boosting, everything might start to sound a little bit uncomfortable, and maybe that's going to be harder for you. But if you start with the cut and sweep that way, then you'll be able to see what immediately starts to sound better. Like, oh, that actually didn't need to be there, and it sounds better in the mix. The fourth and final technique for today's video is going to be a boost. And for an EQ boost, you want to leave this to last, because as you're cutting frequencies that you don't need for your track, you might notice that the whole track starts to open up and sounds a little better. And when that happens, you will realize you didn't need to boost as much as you were going to. So always cut first and boost second. And as you're applying EQ in general, try and keep things to a minimum and don't overdo it, because that's going to be where you have more problems and you're going to be tying yourself in knots. Start small, go throughout the whole entire mix, and try and even things out in a balanced way. For boosting, we're going to use the same sweeping technique as before, and now that you've created all the cuts you need to, boosting is going to be really easy. Maybe you can take the bell and find where's the strong part of the sound and maybe just boost that up a little bit. Lots of times you actually won't need to boost as much as you need to. On some instruments, it's popular to take the highest band and actually just raise it up a little bit, maybe on your cymbals or your vocals. This will give you a little bit of air. So these boosts can be very beneficial, but again, cut first, get rid of the frequencies that are unpleasant or that you don't need, and then start boosting little by little to fine-tune your sound. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're feeling a little bit more confident on the different types of EQ that you can apply to your own mix. I know I wasn't running audio examples through the EQ, but I will definitely be doing more videos in the future about that. Today was just focused on the actual styles and types of EQ bands that you can apply, and just knowing about low cut, high cut, and then cutting with the bell versus boosting with the bell can dramatically change the way that you approach EQ in your mix. Now, thinking just about if you were to low cut all the instruments that aren't having bass frequencies in your mix, you'll immediately clean up the low end. So definitely start there. Start with doing some sweeps and getting out of frequencies that you don't need, and I hope that really helps you out. If you found my video helpful, please do consider liking and subscribing. I really appreciate it. I'll be continuing to post music production content every week for you guys to learn and grow from. But in the meantime, keep making music, keep having fun, and I'll see you later.